The desert does not forgive. Neither do the people who live closest to it. Ethan Cole knew that, but he had spent too many years testing the patience of both. The year was 1867, and the Arizona sun had baked him hollow. Dust clung to his boots, whiskey clung to his breath, and the rattle of empty pockets clung to his bones. His horse had given out 2 towns back, sold for a handful of coins that didn't last through a week's worth of bad poker. Now he walked, shoulders bent against a wind that cut like glass. By the time he reached the trading post at Dry Creek, his tongue felt like leather. The post wasn't much, 3 shacks nailed together, one serving as saloon, another as a goods store, and the last as a kind of bunkhouse for travelers who didn't mind sleeping alongside fleas. The place stank of stale beer, horses, and men who'd run from the law or the past. Ethan fit right in. He pushed through the swinging doors of the saloon, boots dragging, and let his eyes adjust to the gloom. The air was thick with pipe smoke. A card game clattered in one corner, coins and curses tossed across the table. A drunk snored against the bar. Behind it, a barkeep with a gray beard and eyes sharp as knives polished a glass that would never shine. Whiskey, Ethan muttered, dropping the last of his coins onto the counter. The barkeep poured without a word. Ethan threw it back, the burn hitting his throat like fire, and only then noticed the way voices in the room kept dropping low, as though men were afraid of their own words. He listened, said they keep it guarded every night. Drums older than this desert, older than any of us, worth a fortune to the right hands. But you'd have to be mad. The words carried like smoke, curling around Ethan's ears. He shifted closer to the card table. A gambler with a crooked grin and a red kerchief at his throat leaned forward, spinning a tale to the men around him. They say the White Mountain Apache guard a sacred drum. The gambler said, voice just above a whisper, made from buffalo hide stretched so tight it sings, painted with fire and stars. It's not just an instrument, it's their heart. Beat that drum and the hills themselves will answer. But to a collector in Santa Fe, or back east, worth more gold than you'll see in 3 lifetimes. One man spat. No one's fool enough to lay hands on it. Not and live. The gambler's grin widened. Depends how desperate the fool is. His eyes flicked toward Ethan, and Ethan felt a flush creep up his neck. He told himself to look away, to let it pass. But the words burned in his skull. Worth more gold than you'll see in 3 lifetimes. He thought of his debts. The men in Yuma who would slit him open if he showed his face again without coin. The hollow ache of his belly. The way he'd been walking instead of riding. Desperation was a language he knew too well. Night settled fast over the desert, shadows stretching long. The moon rose fat and red, staining the sand like blood. Ethan lay in the bunkhouse, staring at the cracked ceiling, listening to snores and the restless shuffle of men who dreamed of fortune. Sleep wouldn't come. The gambler's words kept echoing. By midnight, Ethan had saddled a borrowed mule and slipped into the desert. The sky was vast, cold, littered with stars. His hands shook, not from fear, he told himself, but from hunger. He knew the Apache lands were a day's ride northeast. He'd crossed them before long ago and barely left with his hide. This time, he swore he would be careful. Quick, silent. The camp came into view near dawn. Smoke curled from low fires, rising between tall pines at the base of a ridge. The smell of mesquite and roasting meat carried on the wind. Horses stamped their hooves in the dust. Ethan's throat tightened. He dismounted, leading the mule into cover, and crept closer. He spotted it near the fire. The drum. It was larger than he expected, resting on a wooden stand. Its hide gleamed pale in the firelight, symbols painted in black and ochre, spirals, arrows, flames. He felt the weight of it from where he crouched, as though the earth itself hummed beneath it. Warriors sat nearby, eyes heavy with sleep. Children curled against their mothers, breaths soft as the night breeze. Ethan's chest hammered. His body screamed to turn back. But his mind whispered, gold, enough to buy freedom. Enough to start over. He waited until the camp lay silent. Then he crawled through the dust, slow as a lizard, breath shallow. The drum loomed closer. His fingers trembled as he touched the hide. warm, impossibly warm, as though it held a heartbeat. The moment he lifted it, the air shifted. The night grew still, every insect falling silent. He froze. Then, from across the camp, a pair of eyes caught his, wide, dark, unblinking. A child, no older than 10, watched him from the shadows. For a heartbeat, neither moved. Ethan raised a finger to his lips. The child didn't cry out, didn't stir, just stared, face unreadable. Ethan hefted the drum and crept back the way he'd come, heart pounding like thunder. By the time the sun broke over the ridge, Ethan was back on the mule, the sacred drum tied behind him. The desert stretched wide and empty ahead. He told himself it was done, that he had it, that he was free. But unease gnawed at him. The memory of those eyes followed him like a ghost. At Dry Creek, the trading post buzzed with nervous energy. Men gathered in tight knots, voices sharp. When Ethan carried the drum through the saloon doors, every head turned. Silence fell. "I've got something to sell," Ethan announced, trying to sound steady. He dropped the drum onto a table. The sound reverberated, low and deep, like distant thunder. No one moved. No one spoke. Then the barkeep whispered, "God help you, Cole." The gambler who'd spoken of the drum before took one look and backed away, shaking his head. "Not me. Not for all the gold in New Mexico." Ethan frowned. "What's wrong with you all? This is worth your grave," the barkeep cut in. "You think you can take from them? They'll come. Every warrior in the hills will ride for you. For that." Ethan laughed, brittle. "They don't know who." "They know," a voice muttered. "They always know." The room emptied fast. Men left their drinks, their cards, their coins on the table. Mothers gathered children, herding them toward the door. Horses whinnied outside. Panic spread like wildfire. Ethan stood alone, the drum before him, and for the first time he felt the weight of it, heavier than iron, heavier than any debt he'd carried. He tried to tell himself it was nonsense, superstition. But then came the sound, faint, at first, like a heartbeat under the ground. Boom, boom, boom. Ethan's chest tightened. He turned toward the open door. Across the desert, on the ridges beyond Dry Creek, riders appeared, dark silhouettes against the rising sun. The sound grew louder, not from the stolen drum, but from others, from many. The hills themselves thundered with it. 200 warriors, painted for war, rode in a line that stretched across the horizon. Spears flashed in the light. Banners whipped in the wind. Ethan's knees weakened. He staggered back from the drum, his hand brushing its hide. The air trembled. The earth seemed to shudder beneath him. He had taken more than an object. He had stolen the heartbeat of a people, and they were coming for him. By the time the sun climbed high, the first riders had reached the edge of town. Dust rose in a choking cloud. The war cries split the morning sharp and fierce, echoing off the canyon walls. Ethan grabbed the drum, clutched it to his chest like a lifeline, though it felt more like a curse. His breath came ragged, his thoughts wild. Every man he'd ever wronged, every debt he'd ever owed, every mile of desert he'd crossed, none of it mattered now. There was only the drum and the thunder. The hills had answered, and they would not stop until he was broken. The sound of the war cries carried through the canyon like a storm rolling in from every direction at once. Ethan Cole ran. He did not bother with saddling the mule proper. He swung himself onto its back, the sacred drum lashed behind him, and kicked hard. The beast lurched forward, hooves scattering dust and stones as it plunged out of Dry Creek. Behind him, the town had already begun to fold in on itself. Men barred doors. Mothers dragged children into cellars. Horses screamed, catching the scent of fear. The thunder in the hills grew louder. The mule wasn't fast, but fear lent it wings. Ethan clung to the reins, breath ragged, eyes darting to the ridges where riders streamed like shadows breaking off from the sunrise. Spears glinted. Painted faces shone. The sound of their drums, deep and endless, rattled in his bones. He pressed himself low over the mule's neck, urging it faster. Hours bled together. The sun burned high, cruel and merciless. The desert spread wide and empty ahead of him, its silence broken only by hoofbeats closing in behind. He risked a glance back once and saw them, dark figures cutting across the land, tireless, relentless. There was no outrunning them, not for long. But if he kept to the dry gulches, the twisting arroyos, maybe he could shake the trail. Maybe. By midday, his lips were cracked and his vision swam. The mule foamed at the mouth, stumbling over rocks. Ethan cursed and pressed it harder, then cursed again when the animal nearly pitched him into the sand. He pulled them into a ravine, the sun disappearing as the walls rose high around him. Cool shadows swallowed them, and for a moment Ethan allowed himself to breathe. He climbed down, checked the drum. Still tied tight, its painted symbols seemed to flicker in the half-light, as if mocking him. He wiped sweat from his brow and pressed an ear against the air. At first there was only silence, then hoofbeats. Slow, measured, deliberate. They were near. He dragged the mule deeper into the ravine, boots crunching over gravel. At the bend, a shallow creek glistened. He dropped to his knees, scooped water into his mouth until his stomach ached. The mule drank greedily. The sound of the water almost drowned out the noise behind him. Almost. The first arrow struck the rock above his head. Stone shards cut his cheek. He spun, revolver already in hand, just as three figures burst from the shadows, scouts, their war paint stark against the sun. They came fast, knives flashing. Ethan fired once, twice. One crumpled. Another staggered, clutching his chest. The third closed in, blade flashing toward Ethan's ribs. He twisted, pain searing as the knife grazed deep. He brought the revolver up under the man's chin and pulled the trigger. The warrior dropped, blood staining the sand. The sound echoed down the ravine. Ethan staggered back, clutching his side, breath ragged. The drum had fallen from the mule in the scramble, rolling toward the creek. For a heartbeat, he thought it might slip into the water and be carried away. He lunged, seized it, pressed it to his chest. The hide was warm, almost pulsing. His hands trembled. He hauled it back to the mule, strapping it down again with clumsy knots. He mounted, spurred the animal forward, and tore out of the ravine before more scouts could arrive. His ribs burned. His vision blurred. Behind him, the hills seemed to roar with fresh fury. By evening, the desert stretched quiet again, but it was the quiet of a hunter stalking prey. Ethan's every nerve screamed that eyes followed him. He rode until the mule faltered and the sun dipped behind jagged peaks, painting the sky in red and gold. He slid from the saddle, legs buckling. He found a dry patch beneath a mesquite tree and collapsed, pressing a torn shirt to his wound. He dreamed of drums, of eyes staring at him in the dark. When he woke, the stars burned cold above. A sound cracked the silence, a twig breaking. He froze, revolver in hand, eyes scanning the shadows. A figure stepped into the moonlight. Small, thin, a child. Ethan's breath caught. It was her, the girl who'd seen him that night in the camp. She stood barefoot, hair loose over her shoulders, bow slung across her back. Her gaze was steady, sharper than any grown man's. "You," Ethan rasped. His throat was raw, his body weak. "Why didn't you tell them?" The girl's eyes didn't waver. "I knew they would come. They always come." She stepped closer, cautious, like approaching a wounded animal. Ethan kept the revolver raised, though his hand shook. She didn't flinch. "My name is Naya," she said at last. Her voice was calm, but beneath it lay something fierce. "You carry what is not yours." Ethan swallowed. His mouth was dry as dust. "I didn't mean—" "Yes, you did." She cut in, sharp as flint. "You meant to take. That is enough." He lowered the revolver, though not entirely. "Then why follow me?" Naya's gaze flicked to his side, where blood seeped through the rag. "Because you will not last long, and because I will not let the drum vanish into white man's hands. If you die out here, I will take it back myself." Ethan let out a ragged laugh, half despair, half awe. "Then you'd best hope I keep breathing." A rustle in the brush cut short their words. A low growl followed, deep and hungry. Ethan's skin prickled. From the shadows padded a mountain lion, muscles rippling under tawny fur, eyes glowing in the starlight. It crouched, tail twitching. Stay still, Ethan hissed. He raised the revolver, but his hand shook too badly. The lion bared its teeth, growl rising. Then it leapt. Ethan fired once, the shot grazing its flank. The beast shrieked, twisting midair. It crashed into him, claws raking his shoulder. He went down hard, revolver spinning away. The lion loomed over him, jaws snapping. An arrow sang. Then another. Both struck deep into the lion's side. It roared, staggered, turned its fury on the smaller figure. Naya stood her ground, bow drawn. The lion lunged, but she loosed one final arrow straight into its throat. The beast collapsed at her feet, twitching, then lay still. Ethan lay, gasping, staring at her. His heart pounded louder than the shots. Naya lowered the bow, face pale, but steady. She walked to him, pressed the revolver back into his hand, and said, "You see, you need me." For the first time in years, Ethan felt shame burn hotter than his wounds. He nodded once. "Reckon I do." They camped together under the stars. Ethan watched her move with quiet skill, building a fire, skinning a rabbit she'd trapped, tending to his wound with herbs pulled from the earth. She worked with the confidence of someone who had lived every moment on the edge of survival. He felt like a fool beside her, a man who'd thrown away too much for too little. When the fire burned low, Naya sat across from him, eyes reflecting the flames. "Why did you take it?" she asked. Ethan hesitated. His throat tightened. He wanted to say greed, but the word caught. He wanted to say hunger, desperation. Instead, he whispered, "Because I thought it'd save me." Naya shook her head. "It will destroy you, unless you give it back." He said nothing. The drums sat between them, silent, heavy, painted symbols glowing in the firelight. By dawn, they moved again. Together, they led the mule toward the river that cut through the valley. Naya warned him the warriors would follow the banks, waiting for him to try the crossing. She was right. As they reached the shallows, arrows hissed through the air. One struck the mule, sending it rearing. The drum slid loose, nearly tumbling into the water. Ethan threw himself into the river, clutching it above his head as the current dragged him under. He kicked, lungs burning, while arrows sliced into the water around him. Strong hands seized his arm, Naya pulling him toward the far bank. They crawled up through the reeds, drenched, coughing. The drum lay between them, miraculously untouched. She glared at him. "You risk death for gold?" Ethan stared back, shaking, water dripping from his hair. "Not gold," he admitted at last. "Habit. Fool's habit." For the first time, her eyes softened. Then maybe it's time to break it. That night, as they huddled by a new fire, Ethan could hear hoofbeats echoing in the distance again. Closer now, louder. The war cries rolled down from the cliffs, sharp and merciless. He knew, then, there was only one road left, straight into the heart of the Apache camp, drum in hand. The desert gave no room for cowards, and his debt was waiting. The land seemed to tighten the deeper they rode. Every tree, every stone, every shadow whispered of eyes watching. Ethan Cole felt the weight of it pressing down, heavier than the drum lashed to the mule. Naya rode beside him on a pony she had called from the brush that morning, a wild little thing that obeyed her as if born to her hand. She was silent, but her silence spoke volumes. She had chosen to lead him back to the very people he had robbed, back to his reckoning. By dusk, the valley opened into a wide clearing ringed by cliffs. Smoke rose in twisting columns. Fires burned like watchful eyes. The Apache camp spread wide. Warriors painted in red and black, feathers catching the wind. Women gathered close, children hushed. At the center, beneath a canopy of pine poles, stood Chief Tala. His hair fell long and gray, his shoulders broad even in old age, his gaze sharp as flint. The crowd parted as Ethan and Naya approached, the drum thumping against the mule's flank with every step. Ethan slid from the saddle, legs unsteady, his ribs still ached, his wounds burned. But none of it matched the fire in his chest. He pulled the drum down with both hands, carried it forward, and set it on the ground before the chief. The air trembled with silence. Tala looked at him as if staring straight through to the marrow. He spoke in a tongue Ethan couldn't follow, but his tone was thunder. Another warrior stepped forward, translating for the white thief who had brought ruin to their door. You have taken what was never yours. You have broken the heart of a people. What answer do you give, thief? Ethan's mouth was dry as dust. He swallowed, looked around at the sea of faces, hard, angry, grieving. His eyes fell on Naya. She gave no signal, no comfort, only watched him with steady resolve. He drew in a breath. I can't give you back what I've done, he said, voice hoarse but steady. I can't buy it off with gold, can't drink it away with whiskey, can't lie about it like I've lied about 100 other things. All I've got left is what you see. A man too damn tired of running. The words fell flat in the silence, but they were true. That was all he could offer. Murmurs spread through the crowd. Some shouted for blood, voices sharp, calling for his scalp. Others argued low, their eyes flicking to Naya. The girl stepped forward suddenly, small against a ring of warriors, but her voice cut through the noise. He fought for me, she said in her own tongue. He could have left me to die in the desert, but he did not. He carried the drum through fire and water. He bled and did not let it fall. Does that mean nothing? The translation rippled outward. Tala's gaze flicked from her to Ethan. The old man's eyes softened, then hardened again like iron. At last he raised a hand and the crowd stilled. This man will not be judged by words, the warrior translated. He will be judged by fire. If his spirit is false, the fire will take him. If he is true, the fire will show it. The people moved quickly, gathering stones, wood, coals still burning from a day's ceremonies. They built a long bed of glowing embers, red as molten iron. The heat licked the air, turning the clearing into an oven. At its end stood 2 warriors holding spears crossed, a gateway of sorts. Ethan understood well enough. His knees weakened, but he straightened his spine. If this was the price, he would pay it. He had stolen the heart of a people. Let the fire burn the truth out of him. Tala gestured to the drum. The translation came sharp. You will carry it across. Drop it, and the earth will drink your blood. Naya's eyes locked on him. She did not speak. She did not need to. Her gaze told him everything. Do this, or die a thief in the dirt. Ethan stepped forward. Heat blasted his skin, choking, searing. The crowd's breath hung heavy in the air. He bent, lifted the drum in both arms, and pressed it to his chest. The hide thrummed faintly under his grip, alive, pulsing with its own heartbeat. He set one boot onto the coals. Fire roared up his leg, flesh screaming. He clenched his jaw, staggered another step, then another. The heat was unbearable, every nerve in his body screaming to flee, to drop the weight, to end the agony. He stumbled, knees buckling. Sparks bit his skin, smoke filled his lungs. The drum slipped, almost falling from his grip. Desperation tore a sound from his throat, half curse, half prayer. Naya shouted something, her voice fierce above the roar. Ethan couldn't hear the words, but the sound lit a spark inside him. He dragged himself forward, one step, then another, vision swimming, skin blistering. His breath came in ragged sobs. The drum's weight grew heavier with each step until it felt like the whole desert was pressing him into the fire. At last, the crossed spears loomed before him. His body gave way. He fell forward, collapsing onto the cool earth beyond the coals. The drum struck the ground beside him, but did not bounce, did not roll, did not fall away. It stayed in his arms until the very last moment. The clearing erupted in cries. Not all were cheers, many still clamored for blood, but the fire had spoken, and no one could deny what they had seen. Ethan lay on his back, chest heaving, skin raw and torn, the stars spinning above. Tala rose, walked slowly across the coals as if the fire bent itself to his will, and stood over the beaten man. He lifted the drum from Ethan's arms, high above his head, and the crowd fell silent. The chief's voice rolled like thunder. The translation followed. He has carried what he broke. He has burned as he burned us. The debt is paid. Ethan's vision blurred, tears streaking down his smoke-stained face. He didn't know if it was relief or sorrow that racked him, only that the weight was gone. When he blinked, Naya knelt beside him, pressing a gourd of water to his lips. He drank greedily, coughing, then whispered, "Why did you help me?" Naya's eyes softened for the first time, because even the worst man can choose once to be true, and sometimes once is enough. He closed his eyes, let her words settle. The fire's heat faded. Cool, desert night wrapped around him. When dawn came, the warriors dispersed, the camp stirring back to life. Tala spoke briefly with Naya before turning his back on Ethan, carrying the drum to its rightful place. No man offered Ethan friendship, but none raised a blade against him either. That was mercy enough. Naya walked him to the edge of camp where the mule waited, patched and restless. She pressed his revolver back into his hand. "Go," she said simply. Ethan swung up, every movement agony. He looked down at her, words caught in his throat. At last he said, "If you ever need me." She cut him off with a faint smile. "The desert needs no one. Remember that." He nodded. Then he rode away. The land opened wide before him, the horizon endless. He no longer carried the drum, but its echo lived inside his chest. He knew he would never touch whiskey the same way, never sit at a card table without hearing the fire crackle beneath his feet. He had been tested, burned, nearly broken, and yet somehow he had come through. The desert stretched quiet, the wind whispering against the stones. He wondered if he was free, or if freedom was just another word for being left with your ghosts. By the time the sun climbed high, the camp was a memory behind him. Ahead lay only road and dust and the unknown. For the first time in years, he welcomed it. Some drums, he thought, are not meant to be played. Some fires are not meant to be stolen. And some debts can only be paid with the soul. And so ended the tale of Ethan Cole, the man who stole a sacred drum and found himself carrying more than he ever bargained for. The desert stretched wide, a sea of dust and thorn, the sun climbing merciless overhead. Ethan Cole rode at a slow trot, his mule limping beside him, every step of the beast like an echo of his own battered frame. His flesh was still raw from the fire walk, blistered and aching, but it wasn't the pain that gnawed him. It was the silence left behind. He'd paid his debt in the eyes of the Apache, yet something deeper still weighed inside him, heavier than the sacred drum he had carried. He had ridden away, but he couldn't shake Naya's eyes, clear, steady, and unyielding. They haunted him more than any fire. She had believed in him when no one else did, though not with softness or pity. Her faith had been a flint, sparking against the iron of his despair, forcing him to rise and walk through hell itself. He owed her more than words, and words had never been his trade. By the second day, the land changed. The ridges broke into gullies, the brush thickened. Coyotes followed his trail, shadows on the horizon, patient as death. He had no food left but a heel of dry bread, no water but what little trickled from a cracked canteen. Still he pressed on, though to what end he couldn't say. He was a man stripped bare, no gold, no gang, no whiskey to dull the ache. Just the ghosts. Near sundown, he spotted smoke on the horizon. Not the thin ribbon of a homestead stove, but the wide black plume of something burning. He spurred his horse, ribs screaming, mule stumbling to keep up. When he crested the rise, his gut turned to stone. Below lay a wagon train ambushed, its carcass sprawled across the flats. Wagon splintered, wheels shattered, oxen lying in blood, bodies scattered, women clutching children, a few men raising rifles in desperation. And circling them like wolves, a band of raiders, white men not Apache, faces covered with kerchiefs, pistols flashing in the dusk. Ethan's hand closed on the revolver at his hip. The same revolver Naya had returned to him. His pulse thundered. He could ride on. No one would ever know. He had burned, bled, and crawled through fire for people who would never claim him. Why should he spend another drop of himself on strangers? But then he saw her. A boy no older than 8, clutching a broken rifle stock, standing in front of his mother like a sapling before a storm. Brave, foolish, doomed. Something inside Ethan split wide open. He thought of the night he stole the drum, How he had trampled through the camp without seeing faces, only treasure. Now, every face burned sharp, every scream cut like a knife. He spurred his horse hard and thundered down the slope. The raiders didn't notice him until the first shot cracked. His bullet slammed into a rider's shoulder, spinning the man out of the saddle. Another turn, cursing, and Ethan put him down with a second shot. Panic rippled through the circle. Hellfire. Rider coming in. Ethan didn't slow. He charged straight into the melee, revolver spitting flame, horse crashing into men and mounts alike. A raider lunged at him with a knife. Ethan swung the pistol like a club, bone crunching under the blow. He grabbed the man's carbine from its sling, fired wild into the crowd, forcing them back. The settlers rallied, shoving wagons into a barricade, women pulling children behind them. A man with a bloodied arm raised his rifle and joined the fight. Shots cracked from both sides, smoke choking the air, the earth a chaos of dust and screams. Ethan moved like a man possessed. Every trigger pull echoed the fire in his chest. Every raider that fell drove him harder. He wasn't fighting for gold or vengeance. He was fighting for something he couldn't name, something he'd thought burned away long ago. But the raiders were many, too many. They regrouped, circling to cut him off from the wagons. One hurled a torch, flames leaping onto a canvas cover. Another reared up with a shotgun. Ethan dove from the saddle as the blast roared, buckshot tearing through his horse's flank. The beast screamed, collapsed, nearly pinning him. He rolled free, came up firing, dropped the man where he stood. He scrambled to the fallen carbine, loaded it with trembling hands, and took cover behind a broken wagon tongue. Bullets split the wood around him, hot splinters biting his face. He sucked in dust, heart hammering, fingers slick with blood. Across the clearing, he saw the boy again, still clutching that useless rifle stock, still standing in front of his mother. The image struck Ethan like a hammer. Once, long ago, there had been another boy, another family. His own. He had left them for a gambler's road and never returned. The weight of it crushed him. All the years wasted, all the lives broken by his hunger. And here in the dust and fire he saw a chance, not for redemption, not for peace, but for one true act that meant something. He rose from cover, shouting, drawing the raiders' fire. Bullets tore past, one grazing his side, another punching through his hat. He didn't stop. He charged headlong, rifle barking, fury in every step. The raiders faltered under the storm, stumbling back. Some broke, spurring their mounts and fleeing into the dusk. Others stayed, teeth bared, guns blazing. The fight turned savage hand to hand. Ethan's rifle ran dry. He swung it like a club, cracked skulls, drove men back. A knife slashed his arm, hot blood soaking his sleeve. He rammed the butt into the raider's throat, dropped him gasping. Another lunged, and Ethan fired his last round point blank into man's chest. Silence fell, broken only by the moans of the dying and the crackle of burning canvas. The remaining raiders wheeled their horses and fled, vanishing into the night. Ethan staggered, chest heaving, every limb shaking. Smoke stung his eyes, sweat, and blood soaking his shirt. He turned toward the wagons. The settlers stared at him, wide-eyed, torn between fear and gratitude. The boy lowered his broken rifle, eyes fixed on Ethan with something like awe. His mother clutched him close, whispering thanks through tears. Ethan swallowed hard, unable to speak. His hands trembled. He had fought, bled, and somehow lived, but he knew the truth. This was no salvation. He was still Ethan Cole, thief and drifter. But for one night, one desperate fight, he had stood between death and the innocent. The wounded settler with the bloodied arm stepped forward. "Stranger," he rasped, "we owe you our lives. What's your name?" Ethan opened his mouth, then closed it. He looked past them, into the desert where the raiders had fled. His ghosts whispered. His scars burned. He thought of Naya's words. Sometimes once is enough. At last he said, "No name worth knowin'. Just keep your wagons tight and your rifles loaded." He turned, limping toward the mule that had somehow survived, tethered at the ridge. Behind him, the settlers called after him, But he didn't answer. He mounted, wincing, and rode into the night. The stars spread cold above, the desert vast and silent. He felt hollow, emptied, yet not broken. For the first time, he wasn't running from the fire or chasing gold. He was simply riding. And maybe, just maybe, that was enough. The desert wind rose, carrying the echoes of drums he would never hear again, and the faint laughter of a boy who had lived because Ethan Cole had chosen at last to stand